Some small firms along the Ohio River sold bromine, but only within the country. So we were a very, very small producer, and we were actually a market for bromine from Germany. The reason the Americans did not compete with the Germans was because of force, not price. About 30 German firms combined to form a cartel, die Deutsche Brominkonvention, which fixed the world price for bromine at a lucrative 49 cents a pound. Now these are the short-sighted people, I'm saying, that you can only find in government economies. They will all get together and say, it'll make us all richer if we set our price higher. Customers either paid the 49 cents or they went without. Dow and other American companies sold bromine inside the U.S. for 36 cents. The Brominkonvention made it clear that if the Americans tried to sell elsewhere, the Germans would flood the American market with cheap bromine and drive them all out of business. The Brominkonvention law was, quote, the U.S. for the U.S. and Germany for the world. So Dow entered the bromine production with these unwritten rules in effect, and he followed them for a while. The Bleach War, however, put him so deeply in debt that he decided to break the unwritten rules, challenge the Germans, and sell bromine in Europe to recover his losses. Dow easily beat the cartel's 49-cent price and courageously sold America's first bromine in England. He hoped that the Germans, if they found out what he was doing, would ignore it. In fact, throughout 1904, he merrily bid on bromine contracts throughout the world. After a few months of this, Dow encountered an angry visitor in his office from Germany, Hermann Jacobson of the Brominkonvention. Jacobson announced he had, quote, positive evidence that Dow had exported bromides, end quote. What of it? Dow replied. Don't you know you can't sell bromides abroad? Jacobson asked. Sorry about that voice. I know nothing of the kind, Dow retorted. Jacobson was indignant. He said that if Dow persisted, the Brominkonvention members would run him out of business whatever the cost. Then Jacobson left in a huff. Dow's philosophy of business differed sharply from that of the Germans. He was both a scientist and an entrepreneur. He wanted to learn how the chemical world worked, then he wanted to make the best product at the lowest price. The Germans, by contrast, wanted to discover chemicals in order to monopolize them and extort prices for their discoveries. Dow wanted to improve the chemical products and find new combinations and new uses for chemicals. The Germans were content to invent them, divide markets among their cartel members, and sell abroad at high prices. Those like Dow who tried to compete with the cartel learned quickly what predatory price cutting meant. The Brominkonvention, like other German cartels, had a yellow dog fund, which was money set aside to use to flood other countries with low-cost chemicals to drive out competitors. I've made this argument before. If you really could do that, get an industry or a company that was just, it drove competitors out of business by lowering prices in that region or whatever, and then raise prices back up, competitors just keep on starting up. It's just going to be a never-ending war. So if it wasn't going to be Dow, it was going to be somebody else next year or someone else the decade after that. You know, it's just not a long-term vision to just stop people in their tracks. You've got to compete with them through intelligence and productivity, not just telling them what to do. But the Germans didn't agree. Dow was determined to compete with the Brominkonvention. He needed the sales, and he believed his electrolysis produced bromine cheaper than the Germans could do. Also, Dow was stubborn and hated being bluffed by a bully. When Jacobson stormed out of his office, Dow continued to sell bromine to countries from England to Japan. Before long, in early 1905, the Brominkonvention went on a rampage. It poured bromides into America at 15 cents a pound, well below its fixed price of 49 cents, and also below Dow's 36-cent price. Jacobson arranged a special meeting with Dow in St. Louis and demanded that he quit exporting bromides, or else the Germans would flood the American market indefinitely. The Brominkonvention had the money and the backing of its government, Jacobson reminded Dow, and could long continue to sell in the U.S. below the cost of production. In other words, we'll lose money for a decade if we have to, but you are done. Dow was not intimidated. He was angry and told Jacobson that he would sell to whomever would buy from him. Then Dow left the meeting with Jacobson screaming threats behind him. As Dow boarded the train from St. Louis, he knew the future of his company, if it had a future, depended on how he handled the Germans. Very intimidating situation. On that train, Dow worked out a daring strategy. First, he had his company sell a token amount of bromine in the U.S. at 12 cents a pound to persuade the Germans that he would fight them on their terms. Second, Dow had his agents in New York directly buy hundreds of thousands of pounds of German bromine at their 15% price. Third, Dow repackaged the German bromine and sold it in Europe, including Germany itself, at 27 cents a pound. When this 15-cent price was made over here, Dow said, instead of meeting it, we pulled out of the American market altogether and used all of our production to supply the foreign demand. This, as we afterward learned, was not what they anticipated we would do. On this last point, Dow secretly hired British and German agents to market his repackaged bromine in their countries. They had no trouble doing so because the Brominkonvention had left the world price above 30 cents a pound. The Germans were selling in the U.S. far below the cost of production, and they hoped to offset their U.S. losses with a high world price, right? Dow courageously repackaged and recycled their bromine and made money doing so. Meanwhile, the Germans were befuddled. They expected to run Dow out of business, and this they thought they were doing. But why was the U.S. demand for bromine so high? And where was this flow of cheap bromine into Europe coming from? Was one of the Brominkonvention members cheating and selling bromine in Europe below the fixed price? The tension in the Brominkonvention was dramatic. According to Dow, quote, the German producers got into trouble amongst themselves as to who was to supply the goods for the American market, and the American agent for the Germans became embarrassed by reason of his inability to get goods that he contracted to supply, and asked us if we would take his 15-cent contracts. This, of course, we refused to do. The confused Germans kept cutting U.S. prices. Now, why would those German companies why would they fight over who gets to sell all this bromine to America? Because it's being sold at a loss. And the only reason is because they get paid by the German government subsidies no matter whether the bromine makes money or not. So that's why they would be fighting over those contracts. The confused Germans kept cutting U.S. prices, first to 12 cents, then to 10.5 cents a pound. Dow, meanwhile, kept buying cheap bromine and reselling it in Europe for 27 cents. They're like, why is Dow still in business? These sales forced the Brominkonvention to drop its high world price to match Dow, and that further depleted the Brominkonvention's resources. Dow, by contrast, improved his foreign sales force, often ran his bromine plants at top capacity, and gained business at the expense of the Brominkonvention and all other American producers, most of whom had shut down after the price cutting. So if you can just stick with it till the end, all the other guys are even going to be out of business in America, and he'll basically have the American monopoly to himself. Fantastic, until someone opens up another one. Even when the Brominkonvention finally caught on to what Dow was doing, it wasn't sure how to respond. But, as Dow said, the profits are not so great because his plants had trouble matching the new 27-cent world price. He needed to buy the cheap German bromides to stay ahead, and this was hard to do once the Germans discovered and exposed his repackaging scheme. The bromine war lasted 4 years, and when finally the Brominkonvention invited Dow to come to Germany and work out an agreement. Since they couldn't crush Dow, they decided to at least work out some deal where they could make some money again. The terms were as follows. The Germans agreed to quit selling bromine in the U.S. Dow agreed to quit selling in Germany, and the rest of the world was open to free competition. The bromine war was over, but low-priced bromine was now a fact of life. So, that's what the destructive price-cutting wars of capitalism lead to. People become absolutely desperate to increase the efficiency of their firm in any way they can. And then at the end of these price-cutting wars, you're left with 2 or 3 companies that are the most efficient, and they have to let up and everything, but they're more efficient than they've ever been before. That's what predatory price-cutting wars lead to in a free economy. Next, we're going to cover Stuart H. Holbrook in the Age of the Mogul.